Greetings. This video is actually a redo of last night's Zoom session. We had some technical difficulties with the recording. So let's get started as we feature the kudos and learning situation of the girls and boys Copper State Championships. We begin with the girls' games, which features the great crew of Brian, Tiffany, and Eric. So let's take a look at what they have for us. We're going to start off a little different tonight with this presentation as we have a situation early in this game that is very, very difficult. It was so close that after running it back several times, I'm going to turn it over to you to make the ruling. It deals with a potential backcourt violation, so let's take a look. So let's take a look at the teaching points, and there will be several situations to discuss. First, our center Eric determines that white number 3 does tip the ball here. Very important aspect of this particular play situation as the play develops. So let's get back to live. And here's the reason why I'm turning this over to you. Several points to consider. First of all, we can see here the ball is very close to being touched by black number 12. The question is, did she tip the ball here? And if she did, does it matter? So something to think about. We'll discuss that further as we get back to live action. So as the play continues, we can see there is a second chance where black number 12 could have touched the ball. Obviously, the situation here is that if the ball was last touched by the black offensive player in the front court, she wouldn't be able to be the first to touch it in the back court. So that is something we need to consider in this particular situation. And to make the play even more difficult, there's going to be a third chance where that ball might have been touched. And here we see that she does touch it in the backcourt. The real good news, however, is that Eric, our center, gives a strong tip ball signal, which is excellent communication. So Brian knows that the ball was tipped by the defense, and as a result, there would be no backcourt violation. The reason why I bring attention to the possible tips, however, was that at other levels that would have made a difference. However, at our level, if either of those three possibilities of the ball being tipped by black number 12, then of course this would have been a black violation. The point being that the tip signal is properly used in this particular case. Nice job. Our next clip actually features a kudo, the first kudo of the night, and actually I should say that tip was a kudo. So I should probably label this as kudo number 2. CC, for those of you that are watching for the first time, that of course stands for correct call. It's going to be involving a holding blocking foul situation. In the same time, we also have a learning situation whereby we can reinforce a point of emphasis for this year dealing with continuous motion. So let's take a look at the clip. So we start things off as we see white number 24 ends her dribble here. This is the learning situation and the point of emphasis for this year. Remember, the act of shooting begins when the dribble ends, and as a result, any foul or any illegal contact that occurs thereafter, continuous motion is in effect. So now would be a good time to review the continuous motion parameters. Remember, continuous motion does allow the shooter to complete their normal, customary, habitual arm movement, as well as their ability to step and pivot. That aspect, number 2, is what the Rules Committee reinforced this year by adding a new casebook play for us to take advantage of. So the reminder is that a player can pivot and step after they have started their act of shooting, and even though they're on the floor, and that's the myth that we're trying to break here, that a player obviously can be in the act of shooting and still be on the floor. The Kudo here goes, obviously, as we see number 24 is in fact fouled by black number 5, so we have a correct call. And just to re-emphasize, continuous motion is in effect. Go along with the Kudo, even though continuous motion should be the ruling here, our trail official, Tiffany, does do a good job of giving the proper no shot signal as opposed to pointing to the floor and saying on the floor. So that part of it is very important to reinforce. If in fact you feel that the player was not in the act of shooting, then therefore this would be the proper signal to give. Before we move away from this clip, I've received a very important clarification as part of an interpretation conference we had this morning with national interpreters, and actually one of them that's on the rules committee. And they clarified that by recent NFHS update, which should be coming out in the next couple of weeks, that a legal jump stop is also considered to be in the act of shooting at the high school level. I emphasize that. And the reason why I'm glad we get a chance to clarify this, because I was asked that question down in the Tucson tip-off meeting, whereby I misstated and said that the jump stop, if they did do a jump stop, then the act of shooting ended. That is not the case. The clarification from the National Federation is that in high school, it is actually part of the act of shooting. Now you're going to see when you watch the college men's game that they, even though they did accept, remember that was the good news, they did accept their change in their old interpretation, and they actually accepted the case play that we've been using, that stepping and pivoting is allowed. They did not go along with a jump step. However, we are. So I hope that clarifies anything that might come up. All right, kudo number 2. Actually, this is going to be a clarification that I've received several questions on. Actually, I'm a little bit surprised, but this is a good opportunity to clarify a situation about closely guarded while dribbling. Let's take a look. So as we can see, we have a clearly closely guarded situation, and the count started at 146, 145 mark. And Tiffany does a good job demonstrating the proper signal that needs to be given. The clarification is simply that in Arizona, remember, we did not, I repeat, we did not take the option that was offered last year by the Federation of suspending the closely guarded rule if we were in a shot clock game while a player was dribbling. So in other words, there is no change from what we have been always doing in the past. Closely guarded applies with both dribbling and holding. So as we can see by the clock, Tiffany was right on with her 5 second count. We're at 140, 5 seconds has elapsed, and as a result, we have a violation. Before we move on, though, the kudo also is given that Tiffany did not operate under the myth that the count stops when a player heads for the basket. I know some coaches believe that if their player goes to the basket, you hear them holler, but they were going to the basket. They were attacking the basket. As long as the defensive player maintained their 6 feet, then the count does continue, contrary to what some people think. So nice job here. So kudo number 3 is going to be a correct call involving a player control foul situation. Okay, this clip was selected serves as a good model for understanding coverage during block file situations like that we have here. This is an advanced technique, so for new officials on the call, this may be a little bit heavy duty for you, but it's a good learning experience for you. And for veterans, this is a good time to review the coverage that takes place. Hopefully, that's going to explain itself in just a second. As we have been doing all fall, we have been running our checklist. Remember, the secret to being accurate and making accurate rulings involving this kind of situation is to run our checklist as it pertains to obtaining legal guarding position. Now, in this situation, we have a secondary defender being involved as the one that is going to be fouled. And as a result, the responsibility for making the call changes a little bit. I'll explain that further when we get back to live action. But I want to run down through the checklist one more time. So again, you're going to hear, especially new officials, you're going to start to hear a lot of reference to referee the defense. Now, obviously, that doesn't mean you got to be 100% on the defender. You got to pay some attention, like 70 or 80% on the defender, but 20 or 30% on the offensive player. But focus on the defender. We're looking for three items. Is the defender, does she have, in this case, does she have 2 feet on the playing court in the opponent's path? Secondly, and we can see clearly she does. Is she facing the opponent? And remember, we've been talking about it's a basketball facing. It doesn't have to be totally perpendicular. It can be a little bit staggered, although here it's pretty much straight. And thirdly, was the position obtained before the opponent left the floor? Usually in a dribble drive situation like this, the player is on the court. So as you can see, our check marks have been filled in all three categories. That means if we do have any illegal contact, torso to torso, the onus is on white number 14 and not the defender. All right, now let's turn our attention to the coverage aspect of this. As we can see, the foul occurred clearly in the lane area, which is the responsibility of our lead official, and also the fact that it was a secondary defender, that's going to be the responsibility by and large from the lead official. Once in a while, however, we do get lost in regard to maybe a player stepping in front of us or we haven't seen the whole play and we're a little bit slow in processing. And I think that what might be happening here in this case. And so what happens here is that our center, Eric, does a fantastic job of becoming what we call a crew saver and making sure that we have a whistle on that. Okay, on to Kudo number 4, another correct call. This time it involves a split step travel. So as we can see, black number 1 catches the ball with her right foot on the floor. That makes that the pivot foot. She picks up that right pivot foot and places it back on the floor with a quick shuffle step. That's become very prevalent in our game currently, and as a result, Tiffany does a good job of making the travel ruling. Okay, another correct call ruling dealing with a travel situation. This is the step back made famous by Caitlin Clark. Again, another very prevalent move. So as we can see, white 14 ends her dribble with her right foot on the floor. That makes that pivot. That makes the right foot the pivot foot. And as we've been saying all fall, the trick to making good, accurate rulings involving traveling is being able to identify the pivot foot. So as we can see, she jumps back, lifts her right pivot foot, places it back on the floor, and as a result, Brian makes a good, correct call, traveling violation. Nice job. How many of you in the previous clip happened to notice the potential for an illegal screen in that step back travel clip that we just looked at? So we're going to take a look at that, and I emphasize the fact of potential illegal screen. We're going to have a no call correct on this particular play. It's going to be a wide base at the beginning of the screen, but it's going to end up being legal. We'll explain that when we get done with the live action. So as I mentioned, this is a potential illegal screen, at least from the initial setup, as we can clearly see that her legs are way out beyond her shoulders. And as a result, if there was going to be contact, the onus would be on that screener. Now, that's going to change, however, and that's why we use the word potential. But this is what we're looking for as we are trying to analyze the situation for whether the screen is legal or not. Our antennas go up, and we have to process it and be ready. So we don't always see this, but in this particular case, the wide stance that we originally saw actually was narrowed. She brings them into her shoulders, and everything is legal at this particular point. I do want to review, though, just quickly the what if or hypothetical. If her legs had stayed out wide, please understand, remember by last year's new interpretation, even with a wide stance, and if the contact that occurred, it would look like this, meaning torso to torso. Even if her legs had stayed wide, that still would have been a legal screen. The only way that would be an illegal screen would be if her legs had stayed wide and black number 3 tried to get around those legs and got tangled up in that wide stance that was offered by the white screener. So everything was legal over here in this case, but a good learning and review situation for us. All right, our next Kudo features a model example of crew floor coverage in a crew of 3. I selected this primarily because I know we have people on the call that are trying to learn crew of 3 or just starting in crew of 3, and they're trying to figure out rotations and where to look and all that other stuff. And I think you'll find that there's a good example here of all 3 crew members doing exactly what's needed in a front court situation. Let's take a look. So actually, we need to start in the backcourt, as Tiffany provides us a model example of backcourt coverage. And this actually applies to not only crew of 3 situation, but crew of 2. And this may be new to some of you, but the principle here or the recommendation is to divide the court into 3 zones, A, B, and C. And the thinking is that we should not be more than 1 zone away. So the concept essentially is 1 over and 1 back. That means that we see the ball here is in the red C zone, and therefore Tiffany, our trail is 1 over and a little bit back. Might be want to be up a little bit more closer to the top of the key there, but 1 over and 1 back in the B zone. And then as the ball progresses up the court, then she's in good position to make any ruling that needs to be made. So now let's deal with front court, 3-court coverage, because our crew does an excellent job of demonstrating what needs to be done by both our center and our trail official. As we can see here, the ball has entered the center's primary coverage area along the sideline. Eric does an excellent job of picking that up. Sometimes what we see is that our center stays too focused. Actually, what we sometimes see is our center goes right to the free throw line extended and stays down there and doesn't pick up the ball quick enough. That is not the case here, as we can see by the red vision cone, that Eric picks that ball up and he is on ball. Nice job. Tiffany, on the other hand, does an excellent job as she now releases to Eric. She trusts her partner, and she knows that she's got to hustle across court and get to her trail position, which is at the 28-foot mark. And as a result, she's going to be in the process of trying to figure out where her competitive matchup or nearest competitive matchup is taking place, and that's shown by the green vision cone. As you can see, it's just barely in her zone, but she's already, at least I think, by the position of her head, it looks like she's already focused in on that potential screen that might be coming up there over on the wing. So nice job in that particular case by both of our officials. And we can't forget about Brian down there in the lead position because he is setting up in a model position for us. He has closed down, a very important term for you new folks learning crew of three. He's down at that lane extended line for a possible rotation. Since the ball is coming up the far side, he's thinking about doubling up the ball side. Now, because these two teams have pretty well spread the court out here, probably rotation isn't needed. But when we get back to live action, we're going to notice that Brian is going to start to go across, and then as the ball swings back, he does a good job of aborting the rotation and he mirrors the ball. So it's a fine job in regard to being in the correct location as the lead, being ready to rotate. And one last item to get back to our center and our trail. What's going to happen is you can see that competitive matchup that we were talking about for Tiffany has moved out onto the court, and it looks like by her head position that she is jolly on the spot there, and she has got a good position with an open view. And Eric has moved up to the court and adjusted his position so that he has an open view on the ball matchup in his zone. As I said, this is a nice example of how the crew of three smoothly works. Well done. Okay, we're going to take a break from the kudos for a second because we have a good learning situation for the end of a quarter last second shot attempt. As you can see, it is very difficult to determine if the ball is actually out of the hand due to the distance of the camera and a little bit of fuzziness of the screen picture. But that's not the important thing. The important thing here is that to remember that our outside official, whether it's the center of the trail, is responsible for the last second attempt. And what we have here is a very, very, very close situation. So the point is we need a big signal, one way or the other, whether you're going to count it or whether you're not. That's not the important thing here, is that we need to really sell this. So I know John McDonald is a big advocate of this, that in this case, we would, if we're not going to count the goal, we need a whistle immediately and big wave off of the basket signal. And obviously, if it's going to count, then we don't blow our whistle, but we simply give a strong, good goal signal. Very important for our outside official to do. Okay, back to the kudos, a correct call dealing with an illegal execution of the Euro step. Okay, before I get to the teaching points, I have to make a confession that when I first selected this clip, or I first saw this play, I actually thought that this was a legal Eurostep. And remember, a Eurostep can be executed legally. But it also means that it's very difficult. And I think this clip proves the point, or at least my thinking does. Because just as soon as I slowed it down and put it into stop action, it was very clear that this was an illegal execution of the Euro step. So let's break it down for you. So we can see white 14 ends her dribble with her left foot on the floor. As a result, that becomes her pivot foot. She then is going to take that step with her right foot. She lifts the left pivot foot. At this particular point, everything is legal. Of course, now what has to happen is white number 14 would have to release the ball on a pass, a shot attempt, or she could call timeout. But as we can see, she elected to return her left pivot foot to the floor before releasing the ball, and as a result, we have a correct call ruling. Nice job. So, on to the boys' Copper State Championship game with our crew of Doug, Jack, and Greg. Let's see what they have for us. So, just like many of our kudos this fall, we have several that feature player control. Correct call. So hopefully you have run your checklist that we've already covered. As we can see, our defender has 2 feet on the playing court in the path. They're facing their opponent and they got there before they went airborne. So the check boxes are made. So if there's any torso to torso contact, it's going to be on the offensive player, white number 5. Now, as far as responsibility goes here, we are going to have a double whistle on that, and we'll talk about that in just a second. So before we talk about coverage, just a friendly reminder that remember the stop the clock signal should always be displayed. And this is a good example. We could have had a disaster here in the sense of a blodge, which of course is, one official calling a block and the other one a charge. Thankfully here, what's happened is that Greg over here as the center has displayed what needs to be done in stopping the clock and holding that. New officials, that's why we advocate don't be in a hurry when you have a foul call. That's your friend. That arm up there can buy you some time to reprocess it really quickly. So as a result, we don't know what Greg has in regard to a call, and it doesn't really matter. The point is that we can see that Jack clearly has a player control foul, and that's what we're going to go with. So again, just to reiterate, stop the clock first, make eye contact with one another, and away we go. Now let's talk about coverage real quickly. This is an area in the middle of the lane where I shouldn't say frequently, but sometimes we do have a double whistle. So in that case, what needs to take place, the responsibility will be going to the lead official. And as a result, Greg does a good job of just simply turning it over to Jack and letting him take it to the table. Okay, kudo number 2, correct call dealing with a taunting situation. So as we can see here, white number 22, after making that block, wants to add a little point of exclamation by getting into the face and saying something to the opponent there. And our lead official, Doug, is jolly on the spot and hears and sees the taunting and correctly assesses a technical foul. For new officials, I should emphasize a technique here that Doug uses, and that is he senses that there might be a little bit of extracurricular activity, and as a result, he stays with the play, especially if a player goes to the court. Sometimes we, as a new official, we have a tendency to hurry out of there before we have a chance to assess what's going to happen at the end. So Doug does a really nice job here of anticipating that there might be some follow-up, and if there is, he's there to deal with it. And we saw the results. Well done. And speaking of at the spot of the file and reporting procedure, this clip here does a good job of continuing giving information in regard to what needs to be done. It's a good example, model example of at the spot. So as you're going to see here, this is a little bit different in regard to what we just saw. This one he is speeding up because there is no extracurricular situation possibilities. And so he is very thorough and quick and professional. So let's review the excellent technique that was just demonstrated. He gets ahead of the play here. Sometimes we can't, but in this case he does. He fights that down that sideline, does a nice job. He stops the clock with a strong signal. He gives a quick, crisp prelim and indicates that we're going to have two free throws, and then hustles to the reporting area. Now, as I said in the previous one, he was a little bit slower because he sensed a situation. Here, there was no situation, and as a result, he went quickly. Sometimes what we see with new officials is that we spend too much time at the spot of the file trying to figure out who the number is and whatever. Again, that comes with practice. That's why we advocate get in front of the mirror so that all of those things that you just saw, stop the clock, give the color and number, and what the file was, and then get out of there. That comes with practicing, not in a game situation, but in front of the mirror. And then he hustles out of there. Now, I also want to make a reference to a clip that's about two kudos away here. It's going to be different because the situation is different. I'm not going to go into the details here, but I'm going to refer back to this. So please put this in the back of your mind, and we'll come back. I trust you'll recall that we had a end of the quarter situation in the girls game, and we have one here. It's a little bit different, but it's another learning situation. But at the same time, it's a kudo because this crew does a perfect example of what needs to happen at the end of the quarter. I selected this primarily because if you remember 2 or 3 kudos sessions, or somebody had a question or a concern that we should not be rotating when we get down to maybe under 30 seconds. In other words, some people calling that locking down. This is a good example of why we don't lock down. I'll explain that when we get to the teaching points. So as you can see, we need a rotation here as the ball is over on that far sideline, and our lead does a good job of doing the rotation. Had he locked down, he would have been straight line. As a result, you can see here by the yellow arrow that he is now in good position. He has the open view, and if there had been any illegal contact on that last second attempt, then he would have been in a very convincing spot to make a call. So this was well done, and that's the reason why we continue to rotate. And of course, the key thing is, remember, the responsibility rests with the outside official opposite the table. So in this particular case, it was the trail to start. Then when the rotation occurred, it just simply, the trail moves into the center position. The person in charge of the last second attempt does not change. And that's why we continue to rotate if the situation warrants. Hopefully that makes sense. Kudo number 5 was selected as a means of showing new officials or those that are trying to clarify crew of 3 throw-in situations. This one involves a throw-in below the free throw line extended. So the situation here, as we can see, the ball went over the sideline, which is the trail's responsibility. In this situation, however, what's going to happen is the lead will administer the throw-in, or at least bounce the ball to the throw. So for this to be successful, our lead has to be disciplined with his eyes. As you can see, he had made the bounce, but he immediately turns his attention to his primary coverage area. Our trail is responsible for chopping in the time and the 5-second throwing count. This is for any throw in that occurs below the free throw line extended on the trail side. Okay, a two-part kudo, one dealing with adjusting one's position to get good looks at the play, and two, a correct call in regards to a travel situation. As we stated, there's two aspects to this kudo. First of all, as you can see, focus on that trail as he adjusts his position. He has to go up above that 28-foot line, which is perfectly fine because that's where the play went. And then as the ball comes back towards the basket, he adjusts his position back and maintains the open view right here, as we can see. And as a result, when we get back to live action, he's going to be in good position to make a ruling on the travel. Had he stayed out there between the 28 and the division line, he probably would not have been able to see this travel situation. All right, so let's break down the travel infraction. As we can see, green 12 ends his dribble with his right foot on the floor. That makes that right foot the pivot foot. He then is going to spin off that left foot and he's going to lift up his right pivot foot. But when he places it back on the floor right here, as we can see, that's where the travel infraction occurred. And our official was jolly on the spot and made the correct ruling. Nice job. Next, we feature an off-ball holding foul. This is very important as we have eye discipline from our lead official not to be a ball watcher. If he had been a ball watcher, this foul probably would never have been ruled. So when we zoom here, we can see that our lead resists watching the ball and correctly rules this off-ball holding foul. So this is the clip that I said would be referring to previous in regards to the pace that Doug uses in regards to when he makes his call. Remember, he's the one that had the technical foul and he sensed that there was something, so he stayed with it, slowed down a little bit. Then we featured him in regard to a quick, obvious, little easy foul, but he made the correct mechanics and signals and hustled to the reporting area. And in this situation, when we get back to live action, please focus on the change of the pace that he's going to use in regards to at the spot. He was quicker in the previous one. Now he needs to take a little bit more time because he senses there's some rising temperature here, so to speak, and as a result does a good job of demonstrating how you adjust, going fast, going slow, depending on the circumstances. So let's Okay, a short break from the kudos because we have a good learning situation as it deals with the National Federation clarification in regards to the dribble rule. Okay, let's take a few moments just to review. This is the actual clip from the Federation video in regard to the new rule or actual clarification. I'm not going to read all of it to you, but just highlight the key points. The main focus here is that slapping the ball, tapping the ball to the floor in regard to just gaining control. In other words, a player hasn't got control, but they reach out and they slap it to the floor. That is not considered a dribble. The key thing is down there in the yellow. As you can see, this is what they added to the rules, hoping to clarify things, and that is that control of the ball, batting, throwing, or pushing the ball to the floor is the beginning of the dribble, and that's what's needed. If we don't have control, then we don't have a dribble. And then obviously it has to go to the floor and then it has to come back just because that dribble is not complete until it comes back up. Hopefully this. So white number 5 reaches out and deflects the ball to the floor. This is not considered a dribble as there was no control. That's the key point. Sometimes we misinterpret it. It certainly looks like a dribble, but by the definition of the rule, it's not because white number 5 did not have control of the basketball. So as we get back to live action, though, we now see that he does gain control right here. And obviously he could start a dribble, but if he does start a dribble, he has not had a dribble. That deflection to the floor is what the Federation wants us to understand. That's not a dribble, so therefore, if he starts a dribble after gaining control here, it would be perfectly legal because it's the first dribble. And as play continue, we see that he does take basically only one dribble and he ends it and he's going to pass off. But this is a legal play. Okay, another learning situation for us, and it does deal with the 2025-26 clarification from the NFHS, uh, their new case play. So let's take a look. So I realize we did cover this in the girls' copper one, but just to review again quickly, this is the comment from the NFHS. Just a reminder that in their case play, they reminded us that a player is still in continuous motion when they are in the habitual throwing motion, and that they are allowed to take a step, legal step, and a pivot. And that's what's going to happen here. So once again, the key is when the dribble ends, and as we can see, green number 12 has ended their dribble there, and as a result, they are allowed to complete their customary arm movement, and specifically this year, thanks to the new case play, they can make that pivot or step while holding the ball, even though they're still on the floor, and continue to attempt to score. So our next kudo features a double whistle situation in the lead's primary coverage area. So what we said previously, sometimes a double whistle does occur in crews of three, and especially in a situation like this where the play actually started in our trails primary coverage area and then goes into the leads primary coverage area. But because the situation did occur in the leads primary, he or she would be responsible for making the original, or I should say, the final judgment. And what's good about this and the reason for the kudo is our lead, which is Doug, of course, does a nice job here of exuding confidence and demonstrating a very strong signal. And as a result, the credibility is there. And what happens here is the partner correctly yields to the lead. Well done. All right, kudo number 9 does deal with another loose ball situation. We've had several of these throughout the fall. Last year, remember, this was a point of emphasis, so we should continue to stay on top of this, no pun intended. And in this case, it is a little bit of a different type of loose ball, so let's take a look. Well, as I mentioned, this is a little bit different. This is not your typical diving by two players. It's kind of an awkward situation where green number 4 has kind of fallen on top of the white jersey player, but it does prevent him from getting up. And as a result, we know that the rule allows a player that has a spot on the floor that they are allowed to have that vertical space all the way to the ceiling. And since our white jersey player is prohibited from doing that, we probably should have ruled a holding foul on this situation. Okay, that concludes the kudos section. However, we did have a play in this game that allows us to emphasize a question that has come up coincidentally in regard to the new rule adjustment involving a thrower and re-entering the court. We've received a couple of questions in regard to the thrower stepping back onto the court and being the first to receive the pass. There seems to be a misunderstanding about that. So we kind of lucked out here, and we have a play that we can use to demonstrate what the rule says and what it does not say. Okay, I realize the clip starts a little bit quick here, but what basically has happened is, so as we can see, white 22 has made the pass in to white number 2. And when we get back to live action, all that's going to happen is white 22, he doesn't delay, he comes directly onto the court and receives the pass back. That is perfectly legal. There is a misunderstanding in regard to being the first to touch. The key to the rule change or the modification is simply that white 22 would have to delay coming back or run down the end line in this particular case, which of course does not happen. So hopefully that clarifies on a typical throw-in situation. There's no change in the rule. That also applies because one of the questions that I got this past week was, well, what about after a made score when the team is allowed to run along the end line? And we know that a team could take a timeout after a made score. That happens quite frequently. They set up a play whereby they have one player take the ball out of bounds, another player, teammate, steps out of bounds, they pass it along the end line out of bounds, and then that player steps back on the court. Original thrower steps back on the court and receives the pass. That also would be a legal situation because it does not involve an illegal situation such as delaying coming on the court or deceitfully running down the sideline. Okay, so normally we would end here. However, I do have an additional information that I think is important for us to take a look at. So, since scrimmage week started last week, I thought it might be interesting to take a look at a couple of scrimmages and see how things were going. Came across some odds and ends of situations that occurred, and since our motto is rekindling our basketball minds by getting the rust out for getting ready for the season, let's take a look at a couple of situations that hopefully will help us get the rust out when the regular season gets going. Now, since some of these plays do feature our officials, it is important to understand that these are learning situations. It's not intended to embarrass any official, coach, player, or institution. The idea here is just for educational improvement. So let's keep that in mind as we watch. So, as we just had in regard to the kudos situation, Well, just a reminder, again, this is the rule change for this year that the thrower shall not purposely or deceitfully delay returning to the court from out of bounds and being the first player to touch. As we're going to see here, this is almost a carbon copy of the play that was shown at the tip-off meeting. So we've got to make sure that we get the rust out. And in this case, we would have a violation. Let's take a look. So by rule, what needs to happen here is the thrower needs to come immediately back on the court. As we can see by the yellow arrow, he is between the E and the S, and that's where he should re-enter the court. When we get back to live action, we're going to see that he comes down out of bounds and comes back on the court where the three-point arc. So obviously, this thrower gains a clear unfair advantage by running out of bounds. He can't be defended there, and he runs along the end line and he comes in well down the end line. As a result, this is a violation. And we got to remember that there's a change this year. Last year, if this play was run, it would have been a technical foul. Of course, the feeling was that we as a group of officials weren't really. The feeling was not really assessing technical fouls on cases like this, and perhaps making it more consistent with a normal violation during regular play, make them consistent, that we would have more people rule this as a violation. So that's the intent, and that's what we're going to do as a reminder. Another friendly reminder is the throw-in spot after a foul. And just to review that, remember that we are going to use the three-point line. Now, for us, that's no change. We started that last year. Remember, we were actually the trend center. But the point here is we have to also remember that if it does occur inside that three-point arc, then the throw-in should be at one of the two, I should say four, 3 feet outside the lane lines, designated spot. Or if it's on the sideline, of course, it would be at the 28-foot line. Let's see what happens in this play. Now, this may seem picky, but of course, 3 feet is not at the lane line. And if we have a court that has a school name or mascot, that big letters like this, basically, usually those letters are above 3 feet. So we can use that as a indication of where the throw-in should occur. So in this case, it probably would be at least at the S, maybe between the S and the T in Vista. And that's where the 3 foot line would be. It would be nice if we had lines, but we don't. So during the pregame, we kind of have to assess where 3 feet is, especially on the end line. 28 feet, of course, we can tell by the coaching box, but we don't really have a mark for 3 feet. It does make a difference in regards to throwing lines of passing, and as a result, that's why we have to care about it. And a quick friendly reminder that on front court end line throw-ins, we need to hand the ball to the thrower as opposed to bouncing it. So our next situation is another good foul ruling, and we need to note the location of where the foul. That's a habit that we need to get into. Even the calling official and even the non-calling official can help should that situation occur. So here we're going to see that the play probably should have resumed at the near side 3 spot end line. So we have a third good foul ruling here, but the location is challenging, as you'll see. So as we can see here, the foul actually is going to occur with the illegal screen with 1 foot inside the three-point arc and the other foot outside. As a result, fouls and violations that occur in an area that is split then we need to be sure to indicate where the play will be resumed. That would be the job of the calling official. So if we can get into that habit, that routine of the last item, make eye contact with your partner and clearly indicate. Now, in this particular case, if the partner indicated on the 3 foot end line, you can't argue with it. The 3 foot spot on the end line, because 1 foot was inside. Or we could have actually put this ball back in play at the 28 foot. The magic question, however, is make sure that we specify so that we make a smooth transition to the spot, whatever spot is indicated by the calling official. So in this play sequence, we have a correct call for the foul. However, the throw-in spot is incorrect. So just as a friendly reminder that any violation of foul that occurs this year the throw-in will take place at one of the 8 designated throw-in spots. And the green line obviously, hopefully sets up where the 28 foot is. We have to eyeball it in this situation, but it should be easy enough to do this. And as a result, this throw-in probably should have been down there where the green line is located. Now, this is a situation where the ball goes out of bounds, and therefore remember that the out of bounds is really easy. There is no change. Wherever the ball goes out of bounds, that's where the throw in will take place. So as we can see, this throw in was moved down to the 3 foot spot, but that is only reserved for violations and for fouls. So in that case, we should have had that throw in occur outside the 3 point arc, just as a friendly reminder. Okay, we switch locations here. We have a throw-in procedure. This is selected primarily for new officials on the call uh, because sometimes this location for the out-of-bounds ball does cause confusion, and hopefully this will clarify. Let's take a look. So as we just stated, for balls that go out of bounds, the throw-in spot is at the location where the ball went out. And what we need to be reminded as is that the ball did, in this case, went out of bounds above the free throw line extended on the lead side. As a result, he or she is responsible for making the ruling, and he or she is responsible for administering the throw-in, as we will demonstrate when we get back to live action. So I think what might have been happening here is the rust that sets in as a result of summer ball. And our lead does correctly come up the sideline to administer the throw in, but of course we need to box in with our partner. And in this particular case, the old trail would go down to the end line and become the lead official, as shown by the arrow over there. And then on this near side, lead official now becomes the trail official and needs to be on the division line side of the thrower and bounce the ball to the number 5 player there on the sideline. So for new officials, this sometimes does present a problem in regards to which way to go. So hopefully this will help you out. Okay, on this play, we do have a correct call dealing with a travel violation. We'll take a look at that because we always like to review traveling, but the location is a little bit questionable. So hopefully you did see the traveling violation, but right now we want to focus on the location where the travel occurred. And as we can see here, it clearly occurred outside the 3 point arc. So we know that that's got to go up to the 28-foot line and not there where the C and the O are. So with that, that concludes tonight's presentation. And again, I apologize for the change of procedure here. We obviously don't have the open mic section. No major questions came in, thankfully, in that regard. And hopefully we can straighten things out for next week. So just please be reminded that next Sunday is our last Kudos session, and that will feature the Open Division Boys and Girls State Championship. Thanks for watching, and have a great week.